Hi, my name is Derek. My preferred pronouns are he, him. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, but my mom was born in Thailand and my dad was born in Malaysia. I haven't seen any live theater previous to this class except for maybe like possible high school plays, middle school, or even elementary school. One fun fact about me is that I'm like a self-taught barber, and a second one would be that I'm currently on two orgs on campus. Starting with like my immediate response to watching Hamilton, if I had to describe it in three simple words, I'd choose electrifying, complicated, and revealing. Um, I would say electrifying because like the show is just like so high energy. The music, choreography, and the performances like just kind of come together and like just go at you at once. Uh, Complicated because the more I learn about like the historical framing and the I guess like the representation and like the choices uh, that they made, this like the more I realize that the show is doing a lot more than just like entertaining the audience, but it's kind of just like reframing America's founding in like ways that can be like I guess inspiring and stuff. And revealing because especially after seeing and reading the articles after class, I started to not only see like the story that is like on stage, but also the system around it. uh, I noticed like the opportunities that it creates, the voices that it uplifts, and also the voices that it leaves out. uh, for me, this play was about legacy and who gets remembered, who gets erased, and kind of like who gets to define what America even means. The artist wanted the audience to think about how America's story can be told with a cast that looked like today's America and not 1776. They wanted the audience to feel this sense of possibility, like the founding of the country is something that we all have like a stake in, and they wanted the audience to understand that the idea of America is constantly being rewritten. Sorry, sometimes by the people we expect, and sometimes by the people we don't. I think the artists mostly succeeded in their goals. The show is powerful, it's emotional, and it resonates with a lot of people. So when we learned about the idea of owning your own, it made me reflect a lot on how people, including myself, talk about race, identity, and oppression. Uh, some of the ideas weren't brand new, but the framework really stuck with me the most. It's like the idea that you have to name your identity and your positionality instead of pretending to be neutral. It also made me think about Hamilton because the show like owns some of its choices, like the color conscious casting, but it doesn't fully own the parts that it leaves out, like slavery and I guess like the erasure of women, uh, or just like reimagining the founding fathers as black and brown bodies. Uh, Kind of just like you know connects to what I read. We talked about the current issues in theater, and honestly, the statistics were pretty shocking. In one of the articles, the AAPAC report showed that in the 2016 to 17 season, 86.8% of plays were written by white playwrights, and 66.8% of the roles went to white actors. And white performers were the only group overrepresented relative to New York City's demographics. Another study showed that women and people of color get fewer jobs and end up in lower paid productions. In the Dear White American Theater letter, it made it clear that this isn't just about numbers. It's about BIPOC artists being tokenized, undermined, silenced, or placed in leadership positions only to be quietly pushed aside. The open letter signed by Viola Davis, Lin Manuel Miranda, Sandra Oh, and so many others described the industry as one where artists of color asked to jump through hoops so organizations look diverse while actually changing their structures. Now, going over the articles that we read, the first one was more of like, went over the hundreds of BIPOC theater artists, called out systematic racism across the entire industry. from boards to casting to fundraising, and demanded, I guess, just lasting structural change. In the second text, the Dear White American Theater Statement, uh, a direct and detailed list of harms experienced by BIPOC theater artists, along with demands for accountability, equity, financial restructuring, and the dismantling of white supremacy in theater institutions. And for the Dear White American Theater Statement, which is the second text, I believe, a summary would just be that it was a direct and detailed list of harms experienced by BIPOC theater artists, along with demands for accountability, equity, financial restructuring, and the dismantling of white supremacy in theater institutions. The third text was Howell Round's Hamilton analysis. Uh, Basically, it was a critique of Hamilton that examines the show's contradictions. It highlighted how it promotes, I guess, bootstraps, mythology, immigrant exceptionalism, simplified portrayals of slavery, the marginalization of women, and overall reinforcement of a patriotic founding narrative. And fourth one was The Atlantic, casting after colorblindness. And this article argues that, Hamilton isn't colorblind, it's intentionally color conscious. It explains why the show requires actors of color in the principal roles and how this decision is both radical and politically charged. And for the fifth one, it was Rolling Stone, Why Gen Z Turned on Lin Manuel Miranda. Well, this article explores generational critiques of Miranda and Hamilton, noting how younger audiences see the show's optimistic portrayals of America as incomplete, especially in its avoidance of slavery, colonialism, and systematic oppression. Now, I guess like my overall reaction to the articles, reading these articles together, it kind of created a bigger picture. Um, my reaction was mixed of like clarity, frustration, and maybe understanding. The reality is that theater isn't just as progressive as it likes to think it is. It has deep structural inequities that affect who gets jobs, whose stories get produced, and how artists of color are treated at every level. I think we had read these articles to kind of show how representation in theater is not just about who appears on stage, but it's about who gets to create, who gets to lead, who gets opportunities, and who doesn't. The articles push us to look beyond applause and think critically. The piece that stood out to me the most was probably the Dear White American theater statement. Its honesty and directness made the problems like almost impossible to ignore. Putting this all together, the play, class discussions, and the articles, I definitely see and view Hamilton in a different light. Uh, Hamilton uses representation as a powerful artistic tool. It makes the founding story feel accessible and inclusive. But at the same time, the current events readings made it clear that representation alone doesn't fix the deeper issues in theater. In fact, Hamilton can sometimes be an example of how representation can exist on the surface, while more uncomfortable truths stay unaddressed. The play reframes American history, but the system around it hasn't changed in the same way. The lack of BIPOC playwrights, leaders, producers, and decision makers show that the theater still struggles with the same inequalities the open letter that describes. So now, I see Hamilton not just as a creative achievement, but as part of a much larger conversation about who gets power, whose stories get told, and how art can both challenge and reinforce the systems around it. Uh, I really appreciate you for listening, and that is my response to the Hamilton and the current events material.